The sun had risen. For the first time in hours, Jacob could clearly see the road ahead. And yet, the greatest challenge of his life still remained. Esau was waiting, the brother he had feared for 20 years, the brother he had betrayed, the brother whose anger had haunted his thoughts through countless nights, the brother he imagined might destroy everything. Jacob stood still for a moment. The morning light warmed the earth. The river was behind him now. The night was over. But inside him, something felt different. Not because his circumstances had changed. Esau was still coming. 400 men were still coming. The uncertainty was still real. Yet the fear no longer controlled him the way it once had. Because the man standing here was no longer Jacob, the manipulator, the deceiver, the survivor, the man who always needed a plan. That man had been left beside the river. What stood here now was Israel, a man wounded, a man humbled, a man transformed. And sometimes, God does not change our circumstances first. He changes us. Because once we change, we often discover the circumstances were never our greatest problem. Jacob looked ahead. In the distance, he could see movement. Shapes against the morning horizon. People approaching, slowly becoming clearer. And then he saw him. Esau, after 20 years. 20 years of silence. 20 years of assumptions. 20 years of fear. 20 years of imagining the worst. There he was, alive, walking toward him, every step closing the distance. Jacob's heart must have raced, because transformation does not instantly erase emotion. Faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is moving forward despite it. And Jacob moved forward, one step, then another, his limp reminding him of the night behind him, his future drawing closer with every breath. Then something remarkable happened, something Jacob never expected, something that shattered every terrifying scenario he had imagined. Esau began running, not advancing like a soldier, not approaching like an enemy, running like a brother, running like someone who had waited years for this moment. Jacob must have frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. This was not the story he had prepared for. This was not the confrontation he expected. This was not the disaster he feared. Esau reached him, and instead of striking him, he embraced him. Instead of condemning him, he held him. Instead of seeking revenge, he wept. The two brothers stood together, holding one another, crying. Years of separation dissolving into tears. Years of pain meeting years of healing. Years of fear collapsing in a single moment. Imagine Jacob's emotions. All those years, all those sleepless nights, all those worries, all those imagined outcomes, and none of them happened. Not one. How often is that true in our own lives? How many battles consume our thoughts for years, only to unfold differently than we feared? How many sleepless nights are spent preparing for disasters that never arrive? How many wounds are created by imagination rather than reality? Fear is powerful, because fear rarely tells the truth. Fear tells stories. Fear predicts futures. Fear creates disasters. Fear magnifies possibilities until they feel inevitable. And Jacob had spent 20 years listening to fear, only to discover that fear had lied to him. The brother he expected to hate him, embraced him. The enemy he imagined was gone. The war had ended long ago. Only Jacob had not known it. And perhaps that realization carried its own kind of pain, because fear had stolen years from him. Years that could never be recovered. Years spent carrying a burden that no longer existed. Yet even that became part of God's lesson, because God was showing him something deeper. The greatest prison is often not around us. It is within us. The stories we believe, the guilt we carry, the fears we nurture, the lies we repeat until they feel true. Jacob had crossed a river, but more importantly, he had crossed an internal boundary. He was no longer defined by his past, no longer imprisoned by old guilt, no longer controlled by old fear. That freedom changed everything. As the brothers spoke, Jacob began seeing the entire journey differently. The caves, the wilderness, the years of labor, the disappointments, the waiting, the struggle, the river, the night, the limp. None of it had been wasted. Every season had shaped him. Every hardship had prepared him. Every disappointment had taught him something. Even the pain, especially the pain. Because pain often becomes the classroom where God teaches lessons success never can. Jacob had wanted a blessing, and he received one, but not the blessing he originally imagined. He expected wealth. God gave transformation. He expected protection. God gave identity. He expected answers. God gave himself. And in the end, those gifts proved far greater. The years continued. The story moved forward. But Jacob never forgot that night. How could he? Every step reminded him. Every limp reminded him. Every sunrise reminded him. He had entered darkness one person, he emerged another. And perhaps that is why this story continues speaking across thousands of years. Because every person eventually faces a Jabbok, a place where the old version of themselves can no longer continue. A place where God confronts the fears hidden beneath the surface. A place where identity is challenged. A place where surrender becomes necessary. For some people, that place looks like loss. For others, failure, disappointment, illness, loneliness, waiting, silence. But whatever form it takes, the purpose remains the same: transformation. God is often more concerned with who we are becoming than with what we are currently facing. Because circumstances eventually pass. But character remains. Pain eventually fades, but transformation endures. And Jacob's transformation would impact generations. Not because he was perfect, not because he never struggled again, but because he allowed God to change him. That is the true miracle of the story. Not that Jacob wrestled with God, but that after wrestling with God, he was willing to become someone new. And that may be the hardest miracle of all. Because many people want blessings. Few people want transformation. Many people want God to change their situation. Few people invite Him to change them. Yet it is often in that surrender that the deepest blessings are found. The night was over. The struggle was over. The fear was over. And now, for the first time in a very long time, Jacob could finally walk forward, not as the man he had been, but as the man God had always intended him to become. Thousands of years have passed since Jacob crossed the river. Empires have risen. Empires have fallen. Kings have come and gone. Civilizations have disappeared into history. Yet somehow, this strange story still refuses to fade away. Because deep down, every human being understands what it means to wrestle. Perhaps not beside a river. Perhaps not through a literal night. But inside the hidden places of the soul. There are battles that nobody sees. Battles that leave no visible scars. Battles that happen behind smiles. Behind careers. Behind achievements. Behind carefully constructed lives. Some people wrestle with fear. Fear of failure. Fear of rejection. Fear of losing what they love. Fear of a future they cannot control. Others wrestle with guilt, a decision they wish they could undo, words they wish they could take back, a mistake that still follows them years later. Some wrestle with grief, a loss that changed everything, a chair that remains empty, a voice they still miss hearing, a wound that time never fully erased. Some wrestle with disappointment, prayers that seemed unanswered, dreams that never happened, doors that never opened, promises that appear delayed, and perhaps the most difficult struggle of all, the silence of God. Because there are moments when God feels close, moments when faith feels easy, moments when hope comes naturally. But then there are other seasons. Seasons where heaven seems quiet. Seasons where answers do not come. Seasons where the darkness feels longer than expected. And in those moments, people begin asking dangerous questions. Has God forgotten me? Does he still see me? Does he still care? Why is he silent? Jacob asked similar questions. David asked them. Job asked them. Countless believers throughout history have asked them, and perhaps you have asked them too. The remarkable thing about Jacob's story is that God never explained everything. He never gave Jacob a detailed roadmap. He never answered every question. Instead, he gave Jacob himself. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson hidden within the story. Because sometimes the greatest blessing is not an explanation. It is an encounter, not a detailed answer. A deeper relationship, not certainty about tomorrow. Confidence about who walks with us tomorrow. When Jacob entered that night, he wanted protection from Esau. When he left that night, he possessed something greater. He knew God more deeply, more personally, more honestly than ever before. And that changed everything, because circumstances can change. People can disappoint us, dreams can collapse, health can fail, money can disappear. But a genuine encounter with God remains. The river remained behind him. The limp remained with him. But so did the blessing. And perhaps that limp is one of the most beautiful details in the entire story. Because modern culture teaches people to hide their weakness, hide the scars, hide the struggles, hide the wounds, pretend everything is fine, pretend everything is under control, pretend you're stronger than you really are. But Jacob walked differently after meeting God. Everyone could see it. Every step revealed it. Every movement testified to it. He carried evidence that he had been through something. And maybe that is not weakness. Maybe that is wisdom. Because the people who know God most deeply are rarely those who avoided struggle. They are often those who survived it, those who walked through darkness, those who endured uncertainty, those who kept believing when answers were absent, those who refused to let go, just like Jacob. Perhaps that is why the most powerful believers are rarely the most impressive. They are often the most dependent, the most humble, the most aware of their need for grace, because they know something others do not. They know what it feels like to wrestle through the night. And they know what it feels like to see the sun rise afterward. So if you find yourself wrestling today, do not assume something is wrong. Do not assume God has abandoned you. Do not assume the struggle has no purpose. The very battle you wish would disappear may be shaping the person you are becoming. The season you want to escape may be preparing you for something greater than you can currently imagine. The darkness may not be punishment. It may be preparation. The silence may not be absence. It may be transformation. And one day, perhaps years from now, you may look back at this season the way Jacob looked back at the river, not with regret, but with gratitude, because it was there, in the struggle, that God changed you. It was there, in the uncertainty, that faith became real. It was there, in the darkness, that you discovered who had been holding you all along. Before we close this journey, I want to ask you a question. What are you wrestling with right now? Fear, loss, an unanswered prayer, a battle nobody else knows about? Share it in the comments below. Someone reading your words may realize they are not alone. And if this story encouraged you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Sacred Truth. because our next biblical journey will uncover another hidden story of faith, suffering, redemption, and the mysterious ways God works through the darkest moments of human life. Until then, remember Jacob, remember the river, remember the night, remember the limp, and remember this: the greatest blessing of your life may be hidden inside the struggle you're trying so desperately to escape. Because sometimes God changes your future, but sometimes He changes you, and often that becomes the greater miracle.